Stuart did a great job summarising some of the points I was going to touch on. David's done a really good job of getting some time back, so I'll try and follow the pattern. I've had some tough gigs this week. Yesterday, I got upstaged by a Spitfire and a Hurricane fly past in Bournemouth. So that skyline, if I see you drifting, I might use the same technique of cartwheels just to get your attention again, but hopefully I'll keep you with me. So a very quick summary is the world has changed, not only for the people at the hub, but for all of you in terms of the policy announcement. So we got this change of ambition, postponement. Everybody's hanging on words from certain ministers as to what they mean by the change in Part L update cycle. But what it really means, we believe, is that it all hinges on nearly zero energy buildings now. So that diagram looks quite similar to some of the diagrams the hub were putting together when we were looking at fabric energy efficiency, carbon compliance, what have you, but it's now all about primary energy. Those of you that are hoping that it's all very clear and cut and dried, sadly you will still need consultants, because when you look at the actual description, it's full of those lovely Europeanese words, so things like nearly zero energy buildings, a nearly zero or very low amount of energy covered by a very significant proportion of low and zero carbon technologies, and on-site or nearby. So those consultants in the room, don't worry, you will still carry on paying the mortgage because there are still questions and queries over the policy. The timelines are from the 31st of December 2020, all new build will need to meet this requirement. Slightly earlier from the 31st of December 2018 for publicly owned and occupied buildings. My interpretation of that is it doesn't include social housing because it's not actually occupied as well. But more clarity will come. What does it all mean in terms of timelines? There's lots of questions about. We're all very familiar now, for good or bad, with the 3-year cycle of Part L and SAP that tended to be updated before it, or very close to it, depending on which part of the technical team you were involved in. The cycle now is linked to this cost optimal review for nearly zero energy buildings. So AECOM did the last piece of work in 2013, and it came out with figures that looked a bit like this. You'll get the slides later. I can see there's some on the walls. But basically, this is almost the recipe for 2013 in terms of U values of the. It's not a notional building, it's a representative national new build profile. And the bit in red is the key part, really. So primary energy, for the figure they used to show we were at cost optimal, put us at around about 115, 120 kilowatt hours per metre squared per year. So king is dead, long live the king. It's all about kilowatt hours. Don't worry about kilograms of CO2. In terms of headlines, I'm sure there are those of you that are still interested in that. But if we then take that and say, so 2013 is essentially that, so it's around about 115, 120 kilowatt hours. In the old days, moment of silence for the hard work of the hub that's now being used in other ways, we would have looked something like this. So it put us around about 45 kilowatt hours per metre squared per year. For those technical gurus in the room, I'm not really being quite honest, because included in the hub's carbon compliance spec obviously is photovoltaics. So it's not quite like for like, but you can see the degree of ambition, if there isn't an update prior to 2020, will be significantly lower. And some may think, well, what does that matter? Where does it put us compared to our colleagues or competitors in the rest of Europe, depending on your mindset? The green are those that have got it all nailed and defined something already. The oranges are those where they're not quite sure, and the reds are, well, we're still debating it in a very tough way. So the ones that have defined it so far, Denmark are declaring their stand at 20. Not surprising, because they've done a lot of work to reduce energy demand already, and their grid and their efficiency is very strong. Belgium are at 45, France between 40 and 60, depending on building type. Austria coming in at 160. I feel like the Eurovision. Nil point for the UK. But anyway, so Germany, you'll be pleased, some of you to hear, haven't quite nailed it yet, so they're not as perfect as some of us like to make out. They're still debating it, but you can bet that it will be probably up there with the first 2 or 3, not towards Austria at 160. At the moment, we're at 117, 120. So depending on what the economic analysis looks like, potentially we could stay at that point. We wouldn't be the worst there. But again, it comes down to consumer demand, political appetite, and technology. So the review will take place in 2017 and will include some new technologies, or maybe not new technologies, but new cost and capital cost and fuel cost as well. But from our perspective within the hub, we believe the challenges remain very much the same around the performance gap, around ventilation and overheating. And some of these have been touched on previously. But I've been kind of grappling, I was going to say in the shower, but that's going to come out wrong. You have these moments, don't you, when you sit on a train and you think, how am I going to explain this to a non-geek? And in my head, the industry, using an archery analogy, my wife's an archer, so I have to be very careful if I annoy her, because she's a lot more accurate than that target there. And my point is, I think that's where the industry is at the moment in terms of delivery predictability. Now, you may call that quality. In my mind, it's about the energy performance and those subjects above. Some people absolutely nail it. Others are almost missing the target. The real question is, what are the key gateways on that journey to achieve that accuracy? Now, am I suggesting we need to get to this world? No, of course not. Academics may want us to. Some purists may as well. But actually, I think it would be lovely if we could get there and do it at a cost that everybody can afford to buy, mainstream consumers, going back to David's presentation. And we may do one day. But actually, I think if by 2017, 2018, we're more in this world, so our grouping is quite tight. We don't have to get every single building plus or minus 1% of its design performance. But actually, if we get a tight group, then when we do change the regulations in the future, it's a lot easier to move the industry as a whole because we know which levers to pull rather than trying to improve everything and coming up with that perfect delivery that I described before. So what are we at the hub doing? A lot of people think we just bitch and complain and say things aren't right and we don't come up with solutions. So this year, we're working very closely with CITB to try and reach out to SMEs and those that tend to face the changes in the regulations early, to share what we found with projects like the Performance Gap, where we did the site analysis. And a lot of people, when we started the Performance Gap project, said, well, it's all down to lazy builders not wanting to build something on a wet Friday afternoon. And many of you in the room will realise that actually it's all the way along the supply chain, right from the person like me who sits with clean fingernails in an office playing with a computer, all the way through to building control. And what we've done with CITB's help is we've worked with LABC, NHBC, and real practical SME delivery-focused people to come up with, in shorthand, a Haynes manual for masonry construction, looking at the 17 key areas where things tend to go wrong. So I don't expect you to see the diagram, but it's just the general feel of the document I want you to see. When you get the printed version, it's got perforated edges. You can pull it out, print it, laminate it, stick it on the site wall, give it to the guys on site, and it explains this is the key part of the building. You may have done it differently in the past, but the reason it's changed now is this, 3 key elements about energy, air tightness, etc. But it also gives signals further up the supply chain. So this one about window positioning. So I think on 90% of the sites that we went to, and we visited 20 to 30 sites, about 200 units, there was never a window that had all 3 of these in the right place relative to the insulation, the right G value and the right U value. There was always one or all of the above wrong. So this is a real critical part. So we describe where it should be and also signal, and if it is set further back, then you need to make sure your window supplier gives you an extended sill. Because often, if the part on site is wrong, people on site don't just stop. Their job is to solve a problem and do the best they can. And they will work around and fix it, maybe not aware that they've reduced the performance in a critical area. We also look at examples, and we've got a great one here provided by Crest, of a common area. So this is the wall to ceiling level insulation, and you often get a large bridging area because they don't meet up. So you can either, as Greenfield Way, which is a timber frame company I work for, employ short-arse people like me who can get into that tiny little triangle space, not with health and safety gear on, but it was a long time ago. Or you can design it out from the beginning and you change the way the roof trusses work so you don't have that problem when you get to site. It's a document full of those sort of little nuggets. We're doing our ventilation study where we're using the same technique as a performance gap. So we gather all of the design and procurement information before we go to site. We then observe what we find, and you've all seen pictures like this. It's not a surprising picture. You knew something like this is going to come up in a hub publication. But what we're doing is using those site audits, walkthroughs, for want of a better description, to feed back to the developer. So the first developer we worked with in the southeast, within 2 weeks had all of their regional procurement directors and site managers in a room with their ventilation supplier, getting some cold steel, as Rob Pannell, my managing director, would say, saying this is what's going wrong on site and this is why it's going wrong with procurement, and they've changed the way they worked. So we're doing that on a number of sites, and we'll turn it into the equivalent of that builder's book, but for ventilation and building services, so that it demystifies many of the areas where there are problems. And yes, so we're reviewing, and we're also doing some quality assessments on site. So not only are we doing paper analysis and photographs, but we're also doing some tracer gas tests and commissioning tests and airflow. And what we're finding often is the overall air exchange rate delivered in the building, Part F requirements, are being achieved. But going back to that archery target, it's more by good luck than good design and delivery. It's because often they've got a decentralized MEV system where the fans are meant to be running at a certain rate, but they're being commissioned by ear, not by flow rate, because they know the occupants will turn them off if they're too noisy. And also, they're ending up with windows and trickle vents that are designed for a natural vent system, not the one that's actually being installed. So you're getting more trickle ventilation, but less through the system. So overall, you're delivering, but it's not a very robust way. Overheating, I'll just quickly run through the highlights figures. Our research suggested 20% of homes are already overheating. 1 in 3 relates to the fact that the last heat wave was in 2003. We had about 2,000 to 3,000 excess summer deaths in the UK alone. It was about 4 to 5 in France. Climate projections suggest by 2040 that will be every third year. 9 degrees, that's the highest recorded urban heat island effect that Stuart was mentioning, difference between London and outer areas. 100,000, that's the cost one developer kindly shared with us that it cost them to rectify an overheating apartment block by putting AC units into a new building. PR disaster. 2,000 is current summer deaths. By 2050, using a conservative future climate and also an aging population, so people more vulnerable to overheating, could be 7,000 deaths a year due to overheating. More important figure, for each one of those deaths, you get 100 admissions to A&E. Hence, National Health Service are very interested in this type of study too. Stuart's already touched on these things, so I won't labour them. In terms of how things are being checked along the way, we heard about SAP Appendix P being one of the gateways. Interesting thing is that a large amount of the procurement people we spoke to when we surveyed 75 different companies said, oh, building control checked that. Building control told us we never check SAP Appendix P because nobody fails. Because everybody just ticks a box to say, yeah, the windows will be open all day and the blinds will be down. Oh, but hang on, it's right next to a railway line and it's in the middle of London. It's not going to happen, is it? So, finally, some thoughts. As we accelerate delivery, because the gateways have been opened, 200,000 plus homes a year, all the constraints are out the way, time for us as an industry to deliver, what do we need to keep our eyes on? Well, things like sandpitch. You'll hear a lot later on about the great work was done by Stuart Milne and Crest and H&H Celcon and BRI in the AMC4 project. It worked really well, this concept of getting people to work together, face the challenge, but really, is that the only way? Are there ways within our contracts and procurement that we can encourage people to share the innovation and take the risks? Because the benefits will then come, but when people retreat to their bunkers and say, oh, my contract in clause 3.19.2 says I am only responsible for this, nobody's going to really try and do something different. How do we avoid gym membership syndrome? So that's the way that I hold in my head. We all have the greatest of intentions, but when the thumb screws come on, pressure for delivery hits, things go out the window, literally, sometimes. We need to create ways so that people focus on quality, not just numbers. And I know some mainstream developers have changed the way that their quality control processes report to the board each quarter, rather than just how many homes have you sold. It's about how many customer complaints have you had, how easy was the journey through building control. And the final one, does your ambition outweigh your talent? So you may be out there saying, we've got super low energy, zero carbon homes, products, supply chain. If you haven't got it, your day will come with David's work on mortgages where occupants and consumers really do expect that from their homes. And if you can't deliver, then you're in real trouble. And the pictures, if you ever wanted to know what goes on inside someone like me's head when they're outside of work, then yeah, playing in the sand, eating pizzas, and riding around in circles as fast as I can. That's probably as honest as Ross gets. So thank you very much. That's me.